In this session, let us learn activity sequencing in detail. We started with the high-level description of the product. We had the high-level scope, then requirements collection, then scope elaboration and scope baselining that happened. The next step was we decomposed the scope into a work breakdown structure, and the next step is decomposing the work packages into activities. And then to this activity list, we superimpose this activity list with the dependencies. Dependencies can be of four types, that is mandatory dependencies and discretionary dependencies. When we say mandatory dependency, it must be done. It is non-negotiable. I cannot start the construction of a building without getting the permission from the local government authorities. That is an example for mandatory external dependency. As a project manager, I cannot do anything about it. It is non-negotiable. Similarly, there is mandatory internal dependency. That means after pouring concrete, I should give 8 days curing time. I cannot negotiate on that. So that is a mandatory internal dependency. There are ways of compressing the duration from 8 to 5 and all, because instead of using normal curing, if we are using steam curing, we can reduce it to 5 days instead of 8 days and all. But to understand this concept, let us not get into that. So if you are using only manual curing of concrete, after pouring the concrete, we should give 8 days curing time. That is an example for mandatory internal dependency. So we discussed about mandatory external dependency and mandatory internal dependency. Then we have discretionary dependencies. The project manager can decide whether it should be done or not. So that is a discretionary dependency. The discretionary dependencies also can be internal or external. As a project manager, sometimes I can decide whether I should do 100% testing of the product or whether I can do only a random testing. That is at the project manager's discretion. That is an example for discretionary internal dependency. And once we superimpose this activity list with these dependencies, we will get the activity sequences and we will get the milestones. Milestones are major events in the project. They don't have any duration by themselves. So if you are considering preparing for PMP certification as a project, a milestone can be gaining your 35 contact hours. That moment you complete the 35 contact hours course and get the certificate, that is a milestone. Submission of application / approval of application is another milestone. Passing PMP is another milestone. A milestone per se doesn't consume any resources. When all the associated activities are completed, a milestone is achieved. So to summarize, at the WBS level we had the work packages. Work packages gets decomposed further into activities. Then we get the activity list. To the activity list you superimpose mandatory dependencies and discretionary dependencies. Both mandatory dependencies and discretionary dependencies can be either internal or external to the project. Once we do this much, we will arrive at the milestones and we will get the activity sequences. This is a major exercise in projects. Now let's say we have a project with, let's say, 25,000 activities pertaining to different engineering disciplines like structural engineering, piping, electrical, kitchen, landscaping. One project manager cannot decide on the dependencies of these activities. We need expert judgment. We need domain experts to come in, brainstorm, and then arrive at the activity sequences. This is a major exercise when it comes to infrastructure projects, because without logically arriving at the correct or practical activity sequences, preparing a schedule is impossible. Whereas for very small projects, maybe a project manager may do all these things. Okay, you may not get expert judgment from outside. A project manager has the skill set, and it's a small team, maybe 10-member team working on a project for 3 months. In that case, a project manager may do the activity sequencing. But for large projects, different expert groups are invited and they only decide the activity sequencing. Project manager has to just oversee it, because a project manager is not expected to have domain knowledge on all these domains. That is impossible. Then once this much is completed, the next step is, okay, we discussed about dependencies. So now there are 4 types of dependencies: finish to start, start to start, finish to finish, and start to finish. These are the 4 dependencies between tasks. Finish to start means activity A need to be completed for me to start activity B. So between A and B there is a finish to start dependency. Start to start dependency. Unless and until activity A starts, I will not be able to start activity B. So unless and until testing starts, I will not be able to start defect fixing. That is an example for start to start. Finish to start in a classical waterfall model, unless and until the design is completed 100%, I cannot start with construction. That is an example for finish to start. Now finish to finish. Something has to finish for me to finish something else. Unless and until testing is 100% completed, I will not be able to complete defect fixing. Unless and until the flooring is 100% completed, I will not be able to complete carpeting. So these 2 are examples for finish to finish dependency. Then we have start to finish dependency. Something has to start for me to finish something else. Maybe when the main power supply comes in, I can stop the generator. So that is an example for start to finish dependency. So all you need to understand is there are 4 types of dependencies: finish to start, finish to finish, and start to finish. Of these, the commonly recurring dependency is finish to start is the most commonly recurring dependency in project scenario. That is, something has to finish for me to start something else. Now there are 2 types of activity sequence diagrams. So we have the work packages. We decompose the work packages into activities, then we sequence them. There are 2 types of sequencing. One is activity on arrow diagram or arrow diagramming method. So here the activities are on the arrows and connected at the nodes. We call it as a activity on arrow or arrow diagramming method, AOA or ADM. Then we have activity on node, that is AON, or it is also known as precedence diagramming method, PDM. Here the activities are within the nodes and then they are connected by arrows. So that is activity on node or precedence diagramming method. So this is an example, another example for an activity on arrow diagram. Activity A 10 days duration, activity B 5 days duration, activity C 10 days duration, and activity D 10 days duration. B can start only after A, C can also start only after A, and D can start only after B and C and B. So to show that dependency that D can start only after C and B, I'm using this dotted line. This dotted line is known as a dummy activity. Dummy activities doesn't have any duration by themselves. Now after drawing this activity on arrow diagram and they are connected at the nodes, the activities are on the arrows. Now which is the longest path? So one path is ABD, that is 10 plus 5 plus 10, that is 25. Another path is A plus C plus D, that is 10 plus 10 plus 10, that is 30. So the longest path is ACD, that is the longest path, and the longest path in the network we call as the critical path. So activities on the critical path should not slip, because if they slip, the project will slip. So that is the importance of a critical path, which we'll discuss in detail in the upcoming videos. Now the same thing I've represented using an activity on node diagram, which is also known as precedence diagramming method, where activities are on the nodes and then they are connected by arrows. So here also we have two paths, A, B, D, that is 10 plus 5 plus 10, that is 25, and we have ACD, that is 10 plus 10 plus 10, that is 30. So ACD is the critical path. So irrespective of whether you are following an activity on arrow diagram or activity on node diagram, the duration of the critical path, which is the longest path in the network, will be the same. When the number of activities are very small, I can quickly do an activity on arrow diagram. But when the number of activities are in tens of thousands, then activity on arrow will not hold good. I may have to go with activity on node diagrams or AON, or it is also known as precedence diagramming method. In the upcoming video, we have one full example worked out using an activity on node diagram or a precedence diagramming method. So that will make it easier for you. Here, all you need to understand is the longest path in the network is the critical path. We can use either activity on arrow or activity on node for doing it, and irrespective of the method followed, the duration of the critical path will remain same, and activities on the critical path should not slip. If the activities on the critical path slips, the project will slip. So continuous monitoring of the critical path is very, very important for the successful completion of projects on time. Now let us summarize all the points we discussed using this mind map. Now we were talking about activity on sequencing. Then we discussed about dependencies. Sorry. So there are four types of dependencies: mandatory, discretionary, external, internal, and combinations also possible: mandatory external, mandatory internal, or discretionary external, discretionary internal. So these combinations are also possible. So on the activity, and there are 4 types of dependencies again, that is finish to start, finish to finish, start to start, and start to finish. Now we apply these dependencies onto activity list. Then we get the activity on arrow diagram, that is ADM, or the activity on node diagram, that is a PDM. And activity on arrow or ADM, activities are on the arrows. It is also known as arrow diagramming method. It uses dummy activities to show relationships, and dummy activities doesn't have any duration by themselves, so you can use as many dummies as possible. And activity on arrow is not suitable when a lot of activities are there. Then comes activity on node diagram or the precedence diagramming method. Here the activities are on the node. It is also known as precedence diagramming method, and this is suitable for complex project with a lot of activities. Both the diagramming methods will give us the critical path, and the duration will be the same of the critical path will be the same irrespective of whether we are following activity on arrow or activity on node. So the longest path in the network is the critical path. Both AOA and AON helps us to identify the critical path. Activities on the critical path should not slip, because if they slip, the project will slip. So we will do an example workout using activity on node diagram in the upcoming video. Thank you.